Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, DDI Data, a Critical Enabler of SOAR, sponsored by Infoblox. My name is Debbie Gruy with the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Our featured speakers today are Dave Shackelford, SANS expert, analyst, and course author, and Krupa Srivatsan, Director of Product Marketing at Infoblox. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and will be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks so much for joining us today. Pretty excited to be here. Fascinating topic today, and one that I think will probably resonate with likely all of you and certainly most of you, because we've seen some significant shifts and trends over the course of, arguably really the last decade that I think are starting to play out in the security arena today in ways that are sort of causing us to take a step back operationally and look at the way that we've really been relying on information that we've been getting from the infrastructure and the environment that we're operating in, and also sort of how we're going to react to that and how we're going to respond. And the folks at Infoblox have a really cool sort of take on this, which I definitely sort of like the way they approach this, and I think I'm probably not going to do them justice. I think you'll probably find that Krupa is going to do a better job explaining their specific take on some of this. But what I want to do is set the stage a little bit with some background and some information on some of these trends and some of the things that have been leading into this, sort of focal area for us, really. So I'm Dave. Hey, welcome, everybody. And I'm going to be joined by Krupa from Infoblox. And what I want to do is just kind of kick us off with, obviously the sort of obvious statement here, the obvious statement, which is, look, things are getting more and more interesting. In fact, it's fascinating. I was at an event just this week, in fact, talking to some other sort of security professionals that had been around for a while. In fact, I ran into a very old friend and former colleague of mine from way back in the day when I was, just new in the industry, and we were sort of in the trenches together. And this was in the 1990s, and we thought it was hard. At the time, we really thought that we were facing these enormous challenges, and security was just incredibly, this amazing uphill challenge for us. And, to be fair, it probably was. We didn't have a lot of the tools and knowledge that we do today. But if I look at what's going on out there right now, just being candid, I think we probably had it easier than we realized at the time, because it's just ugly. The attackers have gotten so much smarter and just savvier in the way that they're going about attacking us that we've really had to alter our mindset and react on the fly much more effectively. And phishing, of course, is just a big part of this. We could spend the whole hour talking about phishing. We're not going to, but just that user focus is causing us some real heartache, because it's the bulk of the threat surface. Really, if you think about this, the users are more exposed than anybody in so many ways, and that's where they're getting in. And we're just, not traditionally great at picking up some of those things. So that's sort of interesting. We also have just such an increase in the sophistication level of malware and the way that these guys are going about lateral movement style attacks throughout the environment. They're not coming in and banging around all the time. I do remember distinctly the day when, back in the early 2000s, we were just getting killed by this onslaught of worms and sort of wormable malware. But it was noisy. We could see it. We knew what was going on out there. And today, you may have no idea that stuff's going on for a significant length of time. And we've seen that reflected over and over again, and some of the significant data breaches. And so, these things are just progressively happening. And obviously, we've got to rise to the occasion to be able to do something about that. So that's, I think we're coming around to this topic today and sort of bringing it to the fore and saying, look, what's the effect on security ops? There's so many different things that we've got to cover, and it has significant ramifications. Number one, we've got this custom malware that, it's not tripping signatures anymore. We figured that out, I'd say easily 10 years ago, that these guys were starting to create nuanced variants of malware that were bypassing signatures, and it really wasn't that hard for them to do. but it's getting even worse. So we can't rely on signatures like we used to be able to. We really can't even rely on some of the lower level indicators at the OS level, the file system level sometimes, because these guys are hanging out in memory, which means we've got to have such incredibly deep visibility into things at the endpoint on systems that, that could be a challenge in its own right. They're using built-in commands on systems. I mean, everybody's seen that progressive shift towards the use of things like PowerShell on Windows platforms as a means of enabling and facilitating further ingress and different types of attack, styles. And so we know that today, but it doesn't make it any easier to always find this stuff. And, these guys are hanging out for a long period of time. So what we're looking to do, I'd say if I had a couple wish list items as a security operator, and I know that's, it's got to be echoed by most of you guys that are fighting the good fight. You're trying to prevent these guys from getting in. And I mean, let's be honest, we want these guys to be blocked wherever possible, but that's not practical in every case. And we know that now. I think we do our best, but you have some reasonable degree or expectation of, the fact that these guys are going to probably get in somehow, somewhere. And what that means is that we need to find them quickly, but we also need to reduce that, what we call dwell time, of them hanging out in the environment and looking for additional places to go, data to find, and potentially exfiltrate, and so forth. And so what that means is we're looking for all these indicators from our environment to tell us that. So we've got some good intel on this today, and we're getting better at it all the time. I certainly wouldn't say this is a doom and gloom discussion, but what we're sort of seeing here is, the fact that now we've got an enormous amount of data that's coming back to us, right? We've got this crazy, staggering quantity of data. So it's almost a double-edged sword. We ask for the data all the time, log and other, types of events, behavioral indicators where possible, network information, all these different things. But now we've got to start asking ourselves, well, how do I make better use of that and sort of pare things down more effectively? And I think that's the bigger question today. We've got to process all this data and do something a little bit more intelligent and sort of rapid with it. And, the organizations are just getting flooded with this stuff. So we've got to get information in a useful format. We've got to be able to quickly detect and recognize some of the issues and potentially alleviate the risks. But we've got to ask ourselves this, final question that's here on the slide. What data is most valuable to us? What's the data that's going to help us sort of align and correlate activities within the environment and sort of piece together more useful and valid activities that are being, performed by attackers or things that would tip us off potentially to those attackers. And so this, I think, is the challenge in front of us right now. And I think we're focusing on it today as an industry. We're starting to realize that we actually have a lot of great data from our operational components. And some of those things, I think, have been heavily underused. We've got lots of data. It's a matter of saying, well, wait a minute, what is it that we could really start taking advantage of more effectively to align with some of this other data that we've got and tell a better story and a story that helps us find these guys more rapidly and sort of pick them out of these really busy environments that we've got. But, on the flip side of that, sort of situation, we've got another couple problems that have to come into this discussion. And, again, we've been talking about this at SANS for a very long time. And I know some of our other faculty members have really focused very heavily on this in some of our other surveys around the SOC and some things. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough people for sure. And we definitely are struggling to find people with the right skills for these types of security ops challenges. And I'll give you my take on that too, because there's been a lot of back and forth debate on, this skill set shortage in the industry. I think there is one, but I don't think it's insurmountable at all. Certainly at SANS, we sort of strive to train people and give them the tools they need to do the job. But in this particular discussion that we're having today, here's what I really feel strongly. I feel that people need some of the IT operations sort of insight and knowledge to more effectively bring that into the security arena. And so, hey, look, if you've ever managed things like DNS, if you've ever had to manage DHCP scopes in the environment to facilitate dynamic addressing of assets, if you've ever had to deal with certain types of networking protocols or configurations, if you've been dealing with any of the sort of endpoint or server level operating systems and, activities, directory type services. Like, you go down this list and say, all that's relevant. And so I think those skills are out there. I think we have to retool and sort of reshape how those come into the security arena so that as we move down this list and say, okay, look, we got a lot of events, we've got, lots more incidents that potentially need to be followed up on. We can start taking some of that insight, some of the things that are coming from the IT ops arenas, to bring that into the mix and say, look, some of this is going to be correlated more effectively and readily by virtue of having that knowledge and that data, and being able to say, look, based on this address or based on this activity or based on this, domain information or based on some of the other types of, pieces of the puzzle that are coming back to us, we can really be more effective at responding more quickly. Because the fact of the matter is, we need more time, we need more people, and we really need less things to do. But guess what? That is not happening. I can, talk about it all day long, but it's not necessarily happening readily. So some of the things we need to also bring in from the event side, or the skill set side rather, are things like event management, and just being able to cull through that stuff, find the things that matter, and start to correlate and build out things like playbooks for response. And of course, we also need people that can do investigations. Now, this discussion we're having today is not so much about things like the forensic side of it all. I think that takes us to a very specific element of IR that's critical and more critical all the time. But the things that we really need right now are rapid detection and rapid analysis of what the problems are that need the follow-up investigations. And today, speaking personally from somebody that spends plenty of time with SOC operations teams that, are just always in the weeds. It just feels that way, especially in big organizations. It just feels like everybody is behind on half the stuff that they're trying to sort of wrangle and keep up with. What I realize, and I think most of us have seen some of this, is that there's just tons of manual tasks being performed, even like little stuff. Simply the act of having to go and manage ticket creation and sort of govern the tickets through the process and the workflows can just chew up enormous amounts of time. Having to figure out whether there's false positives and, sort of stamp things as not being interesting or useful, like that's often done way more manually than it needs to be. And a lot of the tools we've been using and some of the processes that we've sort of integrated that into, I mean, they're just not optimized for a lot of this. And so between having too much data that we're trying to sort of cut out things that aren't interesting, prioritize things that are, I think all of that coalesces into this really stifling issue that I believe personally is really holding us back from being more effective in the security industry altogether. And I would say this goes for organizations large and small. You really just can't throw, people and money at these problems alone. I think we need some effectiveness and, some additional efficiency brought into the mix. And I think there's different ways to go about doing that. And that's really the focus of what we're talking about here today, is asking ourselves, what are the approaches that are going to be more useful for us and potentially more valid for starting to get the job done better. And it starts right here with basically embracing a philosophy of true continuous security monitoring. And while that's easy to say from sort of a cliched standpoint, I get it. I mean, certainly as somebody that's been riding alongside in this industry for a long time, I distinctly recall when the term continuous security monitoring came about. And honestly, it's sort of a joke, or it was at the time, because nobody could really do it. I mean, the tools really weren't there. Most organizations weren't sort of in a position where they could legitimately monitor everything from a security standpoint continuously. And there's still plenty of organizations that aren't there too. So let's just get it out there. But I do think that this is a reasonable philosophy today. And I actually think we have a lot of the tools and information needed to pull it off. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. I'm the last guy to just be, very Pollyanna-ish about getting out there and saying, guys, we can do this. If I really didn't think we could, I'd say, well, yeah, we're probably not there. Let's just do the best we can. But I think we can. I think we can actually do it. And I've seen some organizations really take massive strides forward in building some of this. And one of those things comes down to threat hunting. I'm a big fan of threat hunting, and I've really seen it evolve, as I'm sure you guys have. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a full dedicated team doing nothing but threat hunting all the time, but it needs to be a part of everybody's life. And I think the SOC and sort of the operations arena is where that needs to happen, because you can say, well, look, if I found something interesting, why aren't I looking for that interesting thing everywhere and then building on that and so forth? And so you can start saying, let's connect the dots. I have one piece of information. Maybe there's 2 or 3 other pieces of information that sort of align with it. And let me go dig into those as well. Building out a threat hunting model and operation is huge and tactically very practical and useful for giving you better results in your security ops. I think you need to be able to rapidly look at as much information as possible and ask the questions you need to find out what's going on. Now, some of that comes down to, things like security event management, SIM platforms and analytics toolkits that are just frankly capable of doing the processing, being able to just crunch the data and, spill out some information that's useful. But that's only part of it. I think, just going and spending $1 million on some massive data crunching system is really just the beginning. We need a little bit more than that to go on top of it, because what we've also got to be able to do is pull in the other details and data from system state and other attributes and other information and say which of these things is most relevant and useful. And that's not just correlation. It's also something that we're sort of tying more to operational components. It's not just a security discussion. And we need to be able to do that at massive scale too. So one of the things that I think we've sort of seen overlay this industry and really the big problem statements that I just outlined is the evolution of something called security orchestration and automation for response. And I'm sure you guys have seen this come up in the past few years. It's been quite the hot topic in the operations and security operations industry. And, I think, at least from my perspective, when this term first came out, at least at the beginning, there was this collective groan from the industry going, oh, we've got another acronym, here we go. But I, at least from what I've seen and the people I've been speaking with, I think we've come full circle on that. I think we realized that this is legitimate. Acronym aside, it is what it is. And we need some efficiency, and we need to try to cut out some of those manual tasks and perform better automation of pretty much everything I just talked about where possible. It doesn't mean you're going to automate yourself out of being able to have real skilled analysts involved in things. In fact, I think that's counterintuitive and probably not useful. But if I'm looking at a team of analysts that are trying to get the job done and they're constantly just, sort of treading water and trying to keep up with things, I certainly would say, let's find some stuff that we can make more easy to manage and more rapid fire, especially those manual tasks that just, they're not really adding a lot of value. They have to get done, but they're not adding a lot of value and they chew up time. And so this notion of orchestration and automation is about taking some of that stuff off the table. And so there's a couple places I've seen this evolve a little bit, and I'll delve into that a little bit more here in just a second. And I know Critical will too. But, tying in things like vulnerability data from like vulnerability scanning tools and things and saying, hey, what was the last status of this system? Or this system's acting unusual. Let's trigger an automated vulnerability scan of that system to bring in some additional data to lend context to what we're evaluating. That context is the big part of what we're after here, to be able to say, look, I have data X and Y. Maybe I can go find a way to automatically grab Z from a number of our tools in the security arena, or potentially places within the operations side that could say, okay, this is interesting, or you know what, nah, that's probably not. And validating things like false positives, if I could do that automatically, at least more effectively, I would save 70% of the time, certainly from a tier 1 analyst perspective. If I could cut out a bunch of that junk for the tier 1 folks that are really the ones that say, okay, I'm going to escalate this up to the next level of analyst, or, sort of the team leader investigative team members, then, that's going to help enormously, because those guys just can't keep up with all this. So you need to prioritize what you're sending up to those team members. You need to also find places where potentially you could automate the response and investigation steps too. Now that takes us into a little bit of a different arena, because that starts saying, okay, maybe I need to perform some automated network quarantine, or perhaps I need to perform an automated, memory capture or disk capture forensically, or maybe I need to automate the revocation of credentials if I believe a user's been compromised. And so you start going to, these different playbooks and use cases, and they're hugely valid. They take a lot of time and effort just to make sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot when you're going about that. But, if I can just take a step back and say, I need to validate more and do it more quickly to move things through the pipeline, that's where you start looking for those manual, sort of simple, repeatable tasks, identifying systems and saying, does this system have anything else of interest around it? Are there potential human error issues that could come about if I automate? I mean, of course, could I reduce that rather by automating? Of course. I can certainly speak for myself. If I'm working fast and under pressure, I'm going to make a mistake here and there. Everybody does. It's just life. Simplifying some of these tasks. Now, here's where the challenges come in with automation, or have come in, is looking for the integration opportunities. Today, that's no longer as bad of a problem as it used to be. When this first started coming to the forefront, a lot of the vendors and tools and things out there just didn't think in terms of integration. We didn't have APIs that were extensible. We didn't have means of plugging things in together. And there really wasn't the mindset of a unified ecosystem in the realm of security tooling. I think that's going away. I mean, it's not completely there yet, and I think we all know that. But I think there is an effort amongst the vendor community to work more effectively together, particularly in places where there isn't overlap between product sets and product capabilities, where you're really saying, okay, look, certain places have certain things to offer that we don't. We could all work together better to solve these problems more effectively and start, sort of helping us get further down the road. You're not always going to see where failures occur in these integrations, and you're not always going to find that automation solves every single problem. And I think we know that too. This isn't necessarily a panacea, nor is anything probably really a panacea in the realm of security, but we can definitely get more effective. And you usually want to start simply with this, right? Looking for configuration details or data, looking at that operational data set that is readily available in the environment. I mean, right now, I could go down a list, and certainly I don't have enough time to go through this. I know Kripp's going to speak to some of the stuff, but we have some data in our environment that is always there. It's always available. We've always got a lot of these details for just about any environment, whether from the network level, from system levels. We've got a lot of that, and we can start pulling in that data to start pulling it into some automation tools and really go, take that first step. We can, again, automate some of the non-intrusive stuff. Just, hey, does this data point us in a direction that says this system has done something else that was unusual? Or, hey, here's some other details that you may not have seen about this system and its behavior over the course of the past, 24 hours or what have you, that maybe adds it to the priority list, right? The system looks sort of funny. Now it looks really funny. Let's put it up here and sort of move it further down the road. There's a lot of ways that we can start taking advantage of this without blocking stuff automatically or without potentially restricting people from doing what they need to do and so on. But, eventually you might get there. But I truly believe starting with some of these non-intrusive tasks is always the way to go to, if nothing else, start building out your mindset and workflow using tools like this and starting to take advantage of the data sets that you have available to you. So look for these common repeatable tasks. Don't forget some of the non-technical processes. It doesn't mean that you have to get down into the guts of systems every time. I mean, doing things like ticket creation automation or even closing tickets automatically, while it sounds so trivial, and come on, it is, it's critical, especially if you have metrics based around that. Like mean time to closure is a really common metric amongst busy SOC teams. And the less manual it is, the better off those metrics are going to look. So I'd say that's a great opportunity here that we can start taking advantage of. And look at the things that you're churning on all day and every day, right? What's your SOP for just going through the motions? And ask yourself every single time you're going through any of the motions, hey, is this something that might be automatable or at least semi-automatable within the context of SOAR tools and the concept of this? So these are just some examples, right? And this is a classic Dave slide where I just said, I said, hey, let me just throw some stuff up here and see what sticks. And don't take any of it literally, because it may or may not be applicable to you or may not be applicable, to anybody. It just depends on the context of your environment. But I look at some of these non-intrusive operations, and this is just based on stuff that I've actually seen, doing quick system config checks. In other words, does this system actually meet the standards that we think it should be meeting? And I need to know that quickly. Can I do a quick DNS lookup? Can I do a quick event correlation scenario where I just, pull those things together quickly and say, does this match this? If so, maybe we need to do some additional evaluation. Can I open a ticket from some triggered events and add evidence into that? Can I send some different notifications to various groupings or categorical groupings of team members based on the potential scenario that's underway, based on what the knowledge I have currently is, and also some response types of tasks. I mean, you could do the blocking. You could, again, send employees emails about, violations that are potentially going on. They might not even know about. Dispatching a job to remove some malware on an endpoint system, and you could use endpoint tooling to do that, which many of them now support. You could even force patching if you're really feeling brave, which gets us into a whole realm of conversation that we're probably not going to go to here in this dialogue today. But look, you could come up with plenty of these things. I just came up with some that I've seen people explore or potentially implement. And there's just, the sky's the limit. And we're really seeing the evolution of this start helping security ops teams get better at their jobs. So that's my spiel. I think everybody probably gets at least where we're coming from in the problem statement. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Krupa to get you guys a little bit more in depth on what they're doing in the space. Krupa, up to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And that was a great kind of background on what security operations teams are facing today, right? We talked about skills shortage, and I agree with Dave that it's not insurmountable. I mean, there are solutions and approaches that companies can take to overcome the lack of a really robust security team, because there's not that many people available with the right skills needed. So obviously, one of the ways to overcome that is through automation. But before I go into automation and kind of integrating different security tools to make that happen, I think some of the key tenets when you look at security operations and what they do on a day-to-day basis, the number one thing that they need is visibility, right? So today's networks are no longer about having all the applications reside in a data center and all the users are coming into the office. They're accessing those applications that are behind these firewalls. All the data resides behind these firewalls. Those times are long gone, right? It's about Office 365. It's about direct branches, direct internet breakouts at branch locations, right? People are deploying SD-WAN. Users are connecting to SaaS applications from anywhere and everywhere. They're no longer always sitting within the company's firewalls. So how do you get visibility into all of these things that are happening? How do you make sure that you get the same level of security for your cloud applications and your cloud workloads, for your IoT deployments, right? For those remote branch offices that are now directly breaking away to the internet and not hairpinning that data hairpinning traffic back to the data center. So all of these things give rise to security challenges and visibility challenges. And the less visibility, that a security operations team gets, the more guesswork they're having to do, or the more manual effort they're having to put into getting the information that they need, right? So that's precise visibility. Just knowing what's connecting to the network is very critical. Knowing what workloads are being deployed, where the users are, where the devices are, is super, super critical when it comes to security operations, because without that, they're kind of flying blind. Integrated tools is another key tenet, right? So over the years, and for good reason, companies have, put in 15, 20 different security tools in their network as part of a defense in-depth strategy. Now, what's happened is, as a side effect, is all of these tools, which are great at doing what they were built to do, are not really talking to each other. They are kind of working in silos. They're all generating tons of alerts. But what happens is now the security operations teams are having to process all of these alerts that are coming from their 15, 20, 30 different tools. And they're having to make the decision whether those alerts are important that they need to address immediately, or whether they're just noise, right? So how do they separate the important threat from the noise? I think that's an ongoing challenge. And when you look at the siloed tools, what happens is they're not sharing information with each other. So it could be that an endpoint security solution detected a certain threat, which was also detected by, let's say, a sandboxing solution, and so it was also detected by next-gen firewall. So now these guys are getting alerts from all these different tools, which are related to the same threat, to the same incident, but they don't know that, right? So a lot of the times they're having to chase their tails, so to speak, to find out whether these alerts are real threats or whether they're duplicates, they're noise. So when these tools are not integrated, that's the challenge that that they face. And then the other thing is automation. So because data, contextual data is not readily available on these security events and incidents, a lot of the times threat analysts have to manually look up information about these indicators of compromise and try to piece it all together. And when that happens, the problem is, again, they spend too much time on it. So as we all know, reducing dwell time is super critical to minimizing any damage that these threats can cause. So how do they do that without automation? It's a challenge, right? I think that I read somewhere that the mean time to detection of a breach is almost close to 200 days. It was like 196 days before the security teams can detect that their breach had happened, right? So between that time that the initial compromise happened to the detection, a lot of time has passed, which means that malware has had a lot of time to do damage. Maybe it was exfiltrating data, it is spreading, maybe it was spreading throughout the network. So without automation, you can't reduce that incident response time. So these are the key kind of effects or tenets for an efficient security operations. And when you look at how that, we can mitigate some of those issues, we want to take a look at how can you holistically make your security stack work together as one, right? And one way to do that is obviously integrating a lot of the aspects of the solution. So when I say integrations, when you think about what is the underlying infrastructure that connects all types of networks across the board, which is and this part of this infrastructure is ubiquitous across the board and all parts of the network. It's DNS, DHCP, and IPAM, right? Your IoT devices, if they're IP enabled, they need DNS and IPAM. If they're not IP enabled, the IoT gateway needs DNS and IPAM. So that's like the underlying infrastructure for IoT deployments, for cloud workloads, VM virtual machines. They all use DNS, they all use IPAM. Same thing with traditional networks, right? Your traditional networks also use DNS for connectivity. So all businesses run on DNS, they use DNS for connectivity, but it also is this underlying foundational infrastructure that has a front row seat to threats. So when I say front row seat, what I mean is most malware, the first point of connection, once it's compromised the network and breached the perimeter and is inside the network, it makes a CNC call back to its command and control server on the internet, right? And it does that through a DNS lookup. So DNS sees that malicious activity first before even a next-gen firewall could see that. And what happens is, because DNS has this front row seat to threats, putting in a security solution like a DNS firewall or some malware protection on top of DNS can actually block this malicious activity before it causes further damage or before it spreads east-west, right? So when I say east-west, like within your network, right, from one host to the other, instead of going out to the internet, it could also spread laterally. So how do you, and DNS can see that lateral spread, right? So you can block that type of activity at the DNS layer. But a well-architected security solution that runs on DNS need not just stop at detecting and blocking modern malware and data exfiltration. It can also notify or integrate with the rest of the security solutions. So for example, it can send a notification to a vulnerability management solution saying that, okay, this end host was trying to do something malicious. We caught it, we blocked it, but Rapid7 or Tenable should now go and scan that device to check for what were the vulnerabilities in the first place that the malware was taking advantage of, right? Same thing we could do is we can have that DNS security solution send a notification to a NAC tool, like a Cisco ISE or something. And that NAC solution can now apply policy to close that switch port off on the device that's making this malicious communication, or knock the device off the network, and then not allow it back until it's been cleaned up. You can also send a notification to an endpoint security solution, like a Carbon Black. So now that solution can go and look at the endpoint and check for which executable was responsible for this malicious communication, and then have it cleaned up. So there are a lot of use cases where DNS security can automate not just the blocking but the remediation, right, of the events and the endpoints. So those are some really highly popular use cases when you think about integrations. And now these integrations can automate that response, automate remediation. So you take some of the burden off of the security ops teams by automating some of these things. And the other thing is you can also offload a lot of the work from traditional perimeter solutions, including web gateway or next-gen firewalls. So you can have the DNS security solution block a lot of the known bad activities, and so that all the known threats are blocked, and that malicious traffic doesn't even get to your next-gen firewalls or web gateways, and they can focus on what they were built for, which is more deep packet inspection and things like that. And they don't have to be bogged down with having to block every little malicious activity that's on the network, right? So we can give back processing power to those solutions, so to speak, when there is a DNS security implemented in the network. The other thing, so now I know this presentation was all about SOAR, right? So let's talk a little bit about the SIM and the SOAR capabilities. So as Dave mentioned, one of the reasons for the rise of SOAR solutions is because there's that lack of automation that security teams had when trying to respond to events and incidents. Now, a SOAR solution will help these guys create playbooks on what to do when a security breach happens, right? So they can get a threat analyst will look at these alerts that are coming in. He will try to manually investigate, going onto the internet, going to locations like domain tools or other places, get the information about that incident or the indicator of compromise. Maybe it's a bad URL, a bad IP address, or a bad host name. And then he will decide, okay, this is a big threat. It's a high risk threat. So he will now create playbooks in a SOAR tool or put the information into a SIM tool, and which will then work with the rest of the ecosystem, like the NAC vulnerability scanners or endpoint security, to remediate, right? So, but there is still a lot of manual work that the threat analyst has to do, right? What a DDI solution can help with is provide some more context around those threats, right? What I like to call as crime scene DNA. So it'll give a threat analyst more information about that infection, more information about the history of that device that is infected, where has it been going to on the internet, what other IP addresses that device had, because IP address locations keep changing. So what are the IP addresses it had in the last 6 weeks or last month, who it's assigned to, where it is in the network, right? So is it a financial system, which means it's having critical data, or is it a production system that's running critical applications? So there is a lot of this metadata or business context that the DDI data provides. And now the threat analyst can leverage that information when he's looking at these threats, and automatically he can decide with the context that he's seeing, he can automatically decide which are higher value threats or high risk threats. And there are integrations built into these DDI platforms that can automatically push that information to a SOAR tool or a SIM tool. Or if you don't have a SOAR tool, you can also leverage the direct integrations between this DDI solution to a NAC solution, a vulnerability scanner, endpoint security, like we saw earlier. So now a lot of these processes, a lot of these incident response processes and getting context about infections and putting that information into the rest of the ecosystem to take action, all of this stuff is automated, right, with a well-architected, automated, and integrated DDI solution. So now the threat analyst's job becomes a lot easier. He's not doing a lot of these things manually. He's got tools that help him investigate automatically and get information about an endpoint or an indicator of compromise. And he can focus on more advanced things like threat hunting and be more proactive as opposed to being reactive, right? So that's kind of how we need to think about integrating a DNS security solution with the rest of the security stack. So you're not only detecting and blocking at the DNS level, but you're making the rest of the security stack more efficient and more effective, right? In terms of kind of doubling down on the SOAR integration, so one of the things that a DDI solution, like Infoblox solution, can provide to a SOAR platform is information on IP addresses, the network devices, and malicious events, right? And then the SOAR tool, like I mentioned, can use that information to either block or unblock or check those domains, get more information about those domains and hosts. And what the benefits that a customer gets is now these integrated tools, they're now working in an integrated fashion as opposed to siloed security tools, right? They can respond to these events faster. They can, they can improve their security operational processes by working with all of these things together as opposed to a siloed fashion. So that's kind of how the information that a SOAR platform can get from a DNS security solution and the value of DDI data to these SOAR platforms. So let's say you don't have a SOAR tool, because I know not many companies have it. You can leverage your SIM platform for automation and for more analysis. And a DDI solution can integrate with a SIM platform as well, like a Splunk, for example, here. You can pull data from the DDI solution into the Splunk platform, things like DNS query and response data, IPAM metadata, threat information, IOCs. All of this information can be put into a SIM platform like a Splunk, and now the security ops teams can do further analysis and take action. Now there is a way to make sure that you're not doing a big data dump on the Splunk, because those costs can get prohibitively expensive the more data you consume in your SIM platform. So you can just configure it such a way that you push in only the malicious DNS query log information and not the entire DNS query log information, because that can get really voluminous very quickly. So now the SIM solution can use that information to get better visibility into device activity, malicious activity, as well as improve the effectiveness of its own platform with this rich contextual data that it is getting from the DDI solution. Vulnerability management. So I think I mentioned this use case earlier as well. So the moment that your DNS platform detects malicious activity and blocks it, that can be sent to a vulnerability scanner like a Rapid7, Qualys, or Tenable, not only notifying it, but also giving that solution more information about that infected device, IP address, other lease history and other identifying information. Now, that vulnerability scanner is getting better visibility into everything that's happening on the network. It doesn't even have to be a malicious activity. It could just be a new device that's joining the network. It could be a rogue device that is connecting to the network, and maybe it's between a scan window, right? Companies usually set up scan windows to scan their entire network. But what if a rogue device comes onto the network, does something malicious, and leaves before the vulnerability scanner has had a chance to even catch it or discover it, right? So with a real-time DDI platform and integrations, as soon as a rogue device joins the network, in real time, these vulnerability scanners can be notified, and now they can do an on-demand scan as opposed to waiting for the scan window. So this is good for catching rogue devices. This is good for on-demand scanning when a malicious activity happens. Of course, you still want to do your regular scans at your scan windows, but this is for on-demand scanning that can alleviate some of these threats and reduce that dwell time. NAC integration is another great use case. I think I mentioned this earlier as well. Same thing. So if there is assets that are joining the network, you can notify a NAC solution for that. Same if there's a malicious activity that happens, the NAC solution can be notified. We can also provide additional information about that device, so the NAC solution can use that information to take action and apply policy. So again, we're trying to break down the silos between your all the different security tools that are out there, leveraging the infrastructure that everybody needs and relies on, which is your DNS, DHCP, and IPAM. So leveraging that infrastructure that's there anyway on the network. It's not about adding a 31st security tool on the network or a 50th security tool on the network. It's all about leveraging the infrastructure that companies already need and rely on to improve the security posture and to make the rest of the security tools work together. So I think that's kind of the essence of leveraging this DDI data for a SOAR solution or a NAC solution or a vulnerability scanner. The other cool thing is when devices join the network or when there's malicious activity detected by the DDI solution, it can automatically raise a ticket. With, let's say you're using ServiceNow, you can automatically have it raise a ticket with ServiceNow so that now the admins are aware that these events were detected and that ticketing process can be sped up, so to speak, right? You're accelerating that ticketing process. You're making that more effective and automated. Again, it gives better visibility, it's real-time notification of events that are happening on the network, and being able to proactively respond to these changes as opposed to being reactive, right? You're not manually creating these tickets with it, and there could be a delay between when the event is detected and when the ticket is raised. But when you do this integration with ITSM, you're automating that process like that. So it's really, really effective. And this is another popular use case that we see with our customers as well. So before I wrap up, just one really interesting customer story. This was a major insurance company, and DNS firewall is great. It can block a lot of the malicious activity, but they were kind of skeptical. They said, I already have Palo Alto. It can do many of the things the DNS firewall can, but they did have operational challenges, right? Their vulnerability scanning processes were not effective. They were using SIM and SOAR tools, and the data that was going to the SIM and SOAR, they could not get that data, the query logging, into their SIM tools because they were leveraging Microsoft DNS, and that was not a feature that they were offering. Their sandboxing solution could detect and send alerts, but it was not scalable for mitigation, right? And it cannot block in remote offices, and it was too expensive to deploy these full security stacks in remote offices. It's too cost prohibitive to put full security stack in a remote office or a branch office. So they leveraged DNS security with all the integrations that we talked about, with the cybersecurity ecosystem integrations that we talked about. And what they did was they leveraged these integrations to tell the vulnerability scanner or notify the vulnerability scanner when a new device was on the network. They leveraged the integration with the sandbox solution like FireEye. So when the sandbox solution detects an advanced persistent threat, that information can be put into the RPZ feed or DNS firewall to block that malicious activity across the entire DNS infrastructure, right? And they were able to pull the relevant DNS query log and data into their SIM solutions for further analysis. So this was an interesting use case where the main driver was not about blocking at the DNS level. It was more about efficient workings of the security ecosystem. Stuff they already had. They already invested in these tools. They were looking to get better ROI out of these tools that they have already invested in. And they were able to do that with the Infoblox DNS security solution. a really cool, interesting use case. So just in summary, some key takeaways before we go to Q&A. DNS security does a lot in terms of reducing risk to any type of network, traditional networks, IoT deployments, hybrid cloud deployments, SD-WAN deployments. It doesn't matter. All of those scenarios, all of those digital transformations need DNS for connectivity. So when you put the security layer on top of that, it helps reduce a lot of risk. There was a recent article, I think I just saw that this morning, that in Dark Reading, that said, DNS firewalls could prevent billions in losses to cybercrime. I think the number there was something between 19 billion and 37 billion in losses to U.S. businesses, and I think it's more like 150 billion globally. And this was based out of some survey and some research that was done by a Global Cyber Alliance team. So, people are waking up to the reality that their traditional tools, are inadequate for some of the new digital transformations, and their, a DNS security solution is a cost-effective way to reduce a lot of the burden from the other security tools and make DNS that first line of defense, to help with remediation and to help with threat detection. And of course, we talked about the rest of the ecosystem and making those tools work better and reduce incident response time significantly when you integrate your DNS security with the rest of the security stack. So really some interesting things to think about. You guys may not have thought that DNS, a traditionally network-based tool and technology can be leveraged for security, but these are some new angles that the companies are realizing and angles that can be effective in their threat defense. So just something to think about for this audience as well. With that, I think, Debbie, we're ready to go to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Krupa, and thanks for both of those great presentations. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A session. Here's one. How would a SOAR tool or even service now integrate with data sources such as DDI, firewalls, antivirus, and other security tools?
So is the question, how does it integrate?
Yes, how does it integrate with data sources?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when in a SOAR tool, what operations teams do is they create what's called playbooks. And when they create these playbooks, they pull information from other data sources on the network. And what I'm trying to say is DDI can be an excellent data source that these SOAR tools can pull information from. And how that works is through by integrating the SOAR tool and putting in leveraging API-based frameworks to pull that data out of a DNS security solution like Infoblox. So there are data formats that you can leverage. There are API formats that you can leverage to pull that data out. And there are data available in other parts of the network as well. But the DDI data is kind of the most comprehensive in that it gives a lot of information about not just where the device is in the network, but also what it has been doing right in the past and things like that. So there is a lot of value in that data and that the SOAR team can pull information from.
Great, thank you. Another question, what type of visibility do I get with DDI data versus other visibility tools?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there are some other visibility tools. You can have, other content management tools. You can have other types of data in the network that you can leverage. You can pull information from. You can pull information from, CMDBs. There's other tools that are out there. But like I mentioned, the DDI data provides information about devices that, and it's agnostic to the type of device it is, right? So it could be an iPad, it could be a It could be a smartphone. That's connecting to the network. It could be virtual workloads, VMs, virtual machines. It could be containers, right? I know we know the container technology is really taking off. So it could be containers. It could be anything, right? IoT devices. So because it's agnostic to the type of device that could be infected, and it's agnostic to where what type of deployment it is, virtual, physical, cloud, containers, doesn't matter. Because it's agnostic to all of these things, it provides more comprehensive visibility than some of the other traditional tools that provide some sort of visibility, but not necessarily enough coverage when you think about all these different types of deployments.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Just a question you may have covered. How does the SOAR differ from a SIM?
That's a great question. So a SIM solution was probably developed obviously much before a SOAR solution. They have capabilities that are quite complementary, actually, in fact. For example, like both of them help security ops teams really analyze events that are coming at them, but they're not, while they complement each other, they're not necessarily the same thing. And really, like, kind of some organizations successfully use both to improve their security operations, right? So, for example, a SIM solution can examine log data for patterns, right? That could indicate that a cyber attack is happening on the network, right? It then correlates that information, that event information between devices, and it tries to identify potentially anomalous activity, right? And then it issues alerts. So it's a great correlation tool. The input to a SIM solution is the log data, right? And then the security ops teams looks for patterns. A SOAR tool takes it one step further, right? So a SOAR tool, what happens is it combines this data gathering, right? But it also enables security ops teams to create standardized workflows to take action automatically, right? So this is what we call as playbooks. And what happens is it can now take this data gathering and analysis and correlation and create automatic workflows to take action, like trigger a scan or tell the NAC solution to knock it off the network, providing more information to these solutions. And it can, so the idea here is you're leveraging SIM to gather the data and do analysis. You're leveraging SOAR to create these automated complex workflows. So you're now doing remediation faster, as opposed to doing it a little bit more in a manual fashion if you would use only a SIM solution.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more quick question. Does a DNS security solution just send information to a SOAR SIM tool, or does it block any threats?
So a DNS security solution can do both. So it can detect and block a lot of the modern malware like ransomware, phishing, exploit kits, data exfiltration that can happen via the DNS channel. So it can do a lot of that detection and blocking, right? So that it doesn't spread or exfiltrate data out to the internet. It can do that, and it can also send that information to a similar SOAR tool, so that, as you saw earlier, that tool can do further action and remediation by leveraging the rest of the security stack. So it does both.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That does cover our questions, and we are at the end of the hour. Thank you so much, Dave and Krupa, for those very informative presentations. And thank you to Infoblox for sponsoring this webcast. To our audience, we greatly appreciate your listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. A note, you can find your CEUs for all completed webcasts, including this one, by logging into your SANS portal account. Navigate to your account dashboard, then click My Webcasts. You can then download your CEU on the right-hand side of the web page. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast. Thank you.